All right, Lowell. Hey, welcome to this webinar. Thanks for. I really appreciate you joining me here.
No, I appreciate the opportunity, and welcome to everyone who's joining us as Dave and I will endeavor to have what I'm hoping is going to be an interesting conversation as we go through a little bit of shared learning around strategy and the voice of the member and all that kind of good stuff.
Let's give it a second. I see the numbers of participants rising. I just started this.
Yeah.
Funny enough, I'm not a webinar aficionado like I used to be. Back in the days of running Peach New Media, where there was, that's pretty much the bulk of what we did. And so now doing these webinars is still a little new to me. So it looks like the numbers are settling off now. Good. So I think we got everybody. So folks, I'm Dave Will. This is Lowell Aplebaum. We're here to talk about creating organizational vision through the voice of the member. I had to look at the title. I always have to look at the title of these things, Lowell. And and this morning, Lowell and I got together just in a chat. I figured we ought to talk before we do our presentation. I came with a bunch of slides and it's like, so Lowell, this is what I think, if I talk here and then you talk here and then I talk here and you can talk and this is where I'm gonna do the hard sell. And Lowell said, I'm out.
Basically, that's fairly accurate.
So I threw away my slides. I threw them all away and I said, all right, Lowell, we'll do it your way. We'll just have a conversation online for folks to listen to. So in good old Ariana Rehack Matchbox fashion, I'd love if you guys would put your questions in, try to get involved with us at least. This isn't open, it's not open for a full chat. I don't even know how to do that on this thing, but
if you're in the Zoom, the bottom there's a chat box. You can put the chats in there. I have the chat panel open, so I'll see your questions coming in. I got the chat stuff.
Can they chat with other people though? I don't think they can do that here, but that's okay. So we'll see your chats. I got it open too. I'm looking at that. So Lowell, let's talk about strategic planning and envisioning and how to incorporate the voice of the member in there. Before we do that though, maybe we should introduce each other.
That's fine. We did not plan this part either. We actually said this morning we introduced each other without actually going through that. So I'll go first. If you have not met Dave Will, Dave has been a stalwart and foundational player in the space. Have you ever heard about Once Upon a Time at Peach New Media before LMSs were a real thing? Dave has always had the heart of someone who wants to take what is meaningful learning and get it in front of organizations and their members for really, I think, high level value. And so it's not surprising after that company was acquired to see him end up at PropFuel, which really takes the voice of the member, to take the voice of the customer as a place not just of like reflection, but of guidance and of learning, and can really shape the direction of the organization, which is why hopefully today's conversation will be robust and fulfilling. Not for nothing, I'm dad first and foremost, and he has, I think, just as many pictures of his kids on his Facebook profile as I do, and so it's nice to see a strong parental unit to have a conversation with, and that's Dave.
Thanks, man. I appreciate that, and I have a great deal of respect for Lowell. I've always considered myself an association professional, and what I mean by that is I'm completely invested in the space. But Lowell, like all of you guys, or at least most of you guys, is an association executive. And has been, I think, Lowell, you've worked for what, 5? And I'm not gonna lie, I cheated a little bit because I wanted to make sure I had all the important stuff. But you were with 5 associations, right? Aspen, ISBA, Society of Neuroscience, and mostly involved in membership. However, in the most recent role, you were COO, correct?
I was before I started Vistacova, I was.
So Vistacova is Lowell's newest venture, where he is a consultant. It's a boutique where Lowell is focusing on helping organizations identify their strategic plan, their visioning. Lowell spends a lot of time facilitating discussions with the executive team and ultimately to help associations figure out who they are and where they're going.
That's what we're trying
Want to
to do.
add to that, Lowell?
I would just say, as the heart of a facilitator, it's a pleasure to work with, association executives, colleagues, peers, organizations that are trying to make the world a better place through vision and mission. It's what I love to do, and it's why I think this will be a good conversation.
All right. Well, enough about us. Let's talk about the topic. Let's talk about associations. We're going to talk about strategic planning and visioning. We're going to talk a little bit about the voice of the member and how to marry the two, how to incorporate voice of the member into strategic planning vision. Lowell, can I go first? We didn't plan these questions. A lot of this
don't ask permission. Just do it, dude. Just do it.
All right. So
what is your first question?
I've seen, as an entrepreneur, which I'm very passionate about entrepreneurship. Love Atlas Shrugged. If you haven't read Atlas Shrugged, phenomenal book. Took me 4 years to read it. What's that?
Ayn Rand, of course.
Yeah, it took me 4 years to read it, but I finished it last weekend, and I'm very proud of myself. But having said that, I'm a big advocate for creation, idea creation, and execution. Hence my passion for entrepreneurship. In entrepreneurship, we have models that we can use to create a strategy and a vision for the future. One is called Traction, Gino Wickman. Another is Scaling Up by Vern Harnish, both of which could be used in associations. However, they're not. I haven't seen a structured approach to strategic planning or visioning for associations in my experience with associations, which is somewhat limited when it comes to strategic planning. So I'm asking you, have you seen structured approaches to strategic planning and visioning for associations?
So I think that, the concept of strategy is not new to organizations. I think that if you look at everything from ASAE's CEO forum to the work that very nicely foundational work, I think that organizations like Glenn Techer's organization has done to sort of set that as path that it's well served organizations for a year. And you get a really nice single sheet structure with your goals, and you get your milestones, and there's transferability there, hopefully from board to board. Where I think that there's been shift is in this age of change and disruption. Once upon a time, strategic plan was, all right, what are we going to look like in 10 years? What will we look like in 5 years? Most of the organizations I work with now, we're talking about 3 years. And even then, we know the visions we come up with for 3 years probably aren't actually going to happen with what's happening. And so it's really, how do we come up with a direction for 3 years? Or how do we come up with a vision and a strategic direction that's going to lead us in the right path for 3 years? And then the structure you're asking about, Dave, is within that direction, what do we put in place so that the arms, the voices of the organization are in alignment, all rowing in the same direction, so that the achievements we want to see, we're able to both specify and measure, but be nimble enough to modify and change as continued change happens internally and externally in the environment. So I do think there are patterns, there are approaches nowadays. It's just not as cookie cutter as it once was. It requires not just a single strategic retreat, but it requires a system shift to looking to see how do we actually incorporate strategic practice into everyday practice, be that from the staff and be that from the governance as well. A key part of which is actually incorporating the voice of the member in that, so you're always listening as well.
Have you found that, or let me ask it another way, how often do you see boards and leadership teams and associations go in a room for a weekend, close the door, come out with this great binder, which is their strategic plan, and there's a really good spot for it right up on the shelf, and then they forge ahead just like they always have without actually referencing the strategic plan? Does that happen as often as I suspect it does?
I mean, I would say that I think it happens often enough that you see organizations in strategic crisis from that. So we're starting to get some questions which I'll incorporate because they're touching parts of our conversation. Hi, Mina. So Mina said that they have a process to get member input before they do strategic planning. The question is, are we asking the right questions? And so I want to reference that to what you're talking about, Dave, is that if the moment that we get input from the members is only before a strategic planning process, I think that there's a deficit there. I'm a big believer that we set our boards up to like discuss and decide things, and what we don't do a great job of is listening as mastery, right? We don't do a great job outside of like an environmental scan, which is a snapshot in time, of actually developing systems of listening. So that, the questions you're asking about, right? So what are the questions we need to ask before strategic planning? And usually those are SWOT questions, right? Like, what, from a reflective position, where do we have strengths? What are the threats that are out there? What do we see that's coming? If those are the only times that you try to gauge the member perspective, and not just, but like the stakeholder perspective, like your industry partner perspective of what's happening in the environment, you actually haven't built as an organization of faculty for like advanced input and member voice and listening. Like there has to be a constant cycle of meaningful inquiry into perspective of what's happening in the field, and then the systems in place, whether it's through staff or volunteers, to listening to all of that to come up, I imagine, with patterns, to come up with what are the issues that rise to the top. The question you're asking Mina about, like, what are the questions to ask before you get into a strategic process? You want to have that listening mastery so that by the time you get to the process of strategic planning, you almost what's going on in the environment because you're always asking, you're always listening, and you confirm that with final questions before you get in the room. But hopefully you don't start asking that before you get in the room. But there are systems that need to be in place for those questions.
That's one of the things I struggle with when it comes to surveys. I mentioned Gino Wickman and Vern Harnish, Scaling Up and Traction, the two books that a lot of entrepreneurs use to plan and create a vision. And both of them have, and part of their checklist of what are you doing is, are you capturing feedback on a regular and consistent basis from your customers, in that case, and from your employees? Are you getting feedback on a regular basis? Because those pieces of feedback, and this goes to exactly what we're talking about today, those pieces of feedback need to go right into your daily operations and your longer term vision. I think a lot of associations have these annual surveys, and some of them, unfortunately, it's every 3 years. I've seen some that are every 5 years, every 7 years, but they get this snapshot of 10% of their membership. Actually, surprisingly, the response rate is outrageous because they send it so many times to people, and there's these 20-minute surveys. But it's the snapshot that I'm not a big fan of, as opposed to creating this ongoing dialogue. I'm curious, what are your thoughts? When is a good use for a 3-year survey? Is there a good use for a 3-year survey?
First of all, though, I bump on the word survey. We're getting some great comments in the site. I'll try to incorporate as well. Heidi, I did see yours. Yours is larger in nature, and I'm going to save that for a little bit later. I bump on the word survey because I say this when I do sessions. Like, I pump my gas and I get a survey of how is my gas pumping experience, right? Like, we get so many surveys nowadays that is a single tool of information and perspective collection, I think doesn't necessarily serve us well in the way we used to. So Nikki Duffney said that they're using Traction EOS currently, and they've been collecting feedback from their board and their members and industry leaders to bring to strategic sessions, right? And so there's a difference between the expectation of a single survey to create a snapshot of perspective or an analysis of data and verification of it, and a system of consistent request of input, right? Like, how are you asking for input from different levels and from different gradations and from different perspectives? Diversity, inclusivity, and equity isn't just about like including people at the table. It's about asking for the different voices so you can grow your understanding. And Dave, where I bump on with the 3-year survey you're asking is like that's great. That will like help us perhaps to verify some things, but how does that actually lead itself to like future vision? How is that something that like we can create and then go back to those voices and test about it? I'll share 2 quick anecdotes to that. One is that I was working with an organization that was focusing on next gen, right? And they wanted to see more included voices from the next generation coming in. Well, that's great. They had like a next gen person at the board table who never said anything because they were included, but they weren't being inclusive in inviting it. And then like the elders of the state were saying what next gen needed because that's what they needed when they were young. instead of actually crafting like a next gen advisory group that never had to meet, but got 2 to 3 strategy questions 2 or 3 times a year. What are the topics that are facing you? What are the career challenges that are facing you? Where there would be a constant flow of perspective from this core audience they wanted to focus on that could have really shaped the strategy that they crafted as it pertained to that core audience. So I think there's a question there of like, whose voice do you need? And the second anecdote I'll share about is, sent out a survey and got back like sort of rave reviews on this organization, right? Like, it's been serving its membership well, it's been great. And I conducted 3 or 4 deeper dive interviews, like a different way. And my interviews aren't running questions, usually conversations. And one of the past chairs, who's been a member for a really long time, and like is an evangelist for this organization, because we have the opportunity for a different form of feedback, of conversation, of voice, they came back and said, I actually don't think we may need this organization in 5 years. Like, we may be at a point that it's time to sunset the organization. Like, that didn't come out in any survey. And that, when I brought it to the CEO, when I brought it to the rest of the board, like, first there was the bump stop, and then there was that is a really good conversation for us to have, right? And unless we create different paths of input that allow there to be like meaningful questions with meaningful input from voices that we need to hear, we're not going to hear that kind of feedback, because people are just going to circle their 1 to 5 and go as quickly as possible through the qualitative pieces of input, because we get surveyed so often.
Did you see this
I'll
question
pause there.
Michael? Yeah, it's an interesting question. So Michael asks, do you find that associations often have a large amount of information, but little data they can associate with individual members or member cohorts? I think if I could, let me just go on a soapbox about this for a second. There's 3 kinds of data as I see it. There's behavioral data, transactional data, and psychographic data. Now, the behavioral data and the transactional data is oftentimes associated with individuals and then can therefore be filtered into their associated cohorts. Transactional data is mostly stored in the AMS. There's behavioral data with tools like Rasa, the AI newsletter, and Google Analytics. You can identify what people are doing, where they're clicking, what's stimulating to them in terms of content. What very few people are capturing is the psychographic data. And that's something that we've in PropFuel tried to help people capture, is what is that sentiment that's happening in your membership? Because you're not going to get sentiment out of behavioral data. You're not going to get sentiment out of transactional data. And the way we do that, Michael, that helps take all this information, this incredible wealth of information, and actually helps us apply it to individual groups of people, is we target them, the questions, much like we target campaigns. Marketing campaigns. And in fact, we call what we do feedback campaigns. And so the idea here is that we're asking very specific groups of people questions throughout the journey of their membership. For example, it starts, of course, with new member engagement. And how do most associations do new member engagement? They send stuff to the members. Hey, look at this, sign up for this, check out all these things that you might be interested because you're a new member. Don't forget to sign up for this conference, watch these videos. And it's all just stuff getting thrown at. As Reggie Henry, he said this many, many times. It's like one of his customers, one of us, told him that ASAE, when you sign up, it's like they're backing a dump truck into your driveway and just emptying it on your driveway. I mean, it's a ton of stuff. But what most organizations aren't doing is asking new members questions about where they want to go, about what they want to be guided through. And so that's an example of how we take all this information and we can apply it to a very specific group of people by focusing on campaigns, whether it's a marketing campaign or a feedback campaign, focusing on campaigns for new members, lapsed members, students, people that are interested in evolving in their career, midlife members, lifetime members, and so on. Anything you want to add to that, Lowell?
Well, I'll add 2 or 3 things from that, and Heidi, I'm going to try to incorporate your question into this, is that I think that what you're describing as like a segmentation of voice and perspective to make sure it rises to the fore are those places of greatest opportunity. is something that I love, that the approach that you take with the Proper Fuel platform helps identify that. And I think can be also added to from other efforts. I mean, you know, the simple, right, in the 12-month membership cycle, the 6-month mark, the 3-question, where are we knocking out of the park? Where are we coming up short for you? What's the one thing we could do differently? You hear the same thing 10, 12, 20 times, like that's something to pay attention to, right? You know, Heidi asked the question that when an executive has a vision for an organization that doesn't mesh with how the board sees the organization, how do you make that bridge? Can strategic planning help the conversation? You know, I think the word there is planning is where I'll pause, because I think that that is a strategic conversation to have. You know, I think that is, how is it within the practices of how an organization is run, where there are external factors of change identified for a board or leadership body to prioritize. Some use the ASC Foundation's drivers of change, the 50 drivers of change, like what's most relevant to our industry or organization. Some look internally to like what is happening within a specific profession industry they represent. But to take those factors and then to have the board discuss, all right, how are we actually going to come up with the best fit solutions, you know, to hopefully help us, you know, navigate the waves that these factors are causing. You know, Heidi, you're asking, can strategic planning help a conversation around aligned vision? My answer would be that it actually sounds like that there's the opportunity there before you get to planning to have a vision session. You know, Dave, I'd be interested in your thought. You know, I often talk to groups around this concept, and many groups do like 3-year strategic planning cycles. And I say if they were actually doing this well, what would actually happen is that in like year 0, like you're starting, like your planning just started, right? So at the 1-year anniversary, like take a fresh look, make sure it's set in the right way, but then do some external environment analysis. Like look at the drivers of change. What is going on in our industry? What is the vision we need to pull in, or the things we need to be paying attention to? See how you incorporate that for the following year. And in year 2, you do an internal review. Like how do we, I've crafted a retreat called Charrette, which is based off of a co-creation without a set agenda, where smart thought leaders come in and say what they think are the most important things in the room. But this idea of like listening to like stakeholder thought leader voice for places of focus, so that there's like internal, like that it's not just external view, but internal view. Where does our vision need to be focused internally in year 2? So by the time you get to year 3, you've had 2 years of reflection of what's happening in the external and the internal environment. So the voices you're listening to that you've developed in those 2 processes are all feeding in to what should then be like a robust strategy session that is a moment in time. It's good, but it's not an isolated incident. It's part of a larger conversation. And I think, Dave, what you're saying in terms of a consistent focus on which audiences we need to listen to and how we incorporate those voices on an ongoing basis is actually what makes a robust and worthwhile strategic plan emerge, because it's not just a moment in time. It's an ongoing process. And so my answer to your question is that I do think strategy, a visioning retreat, can help an executive and a board when it comes to strategy hear each other better. But I think until you come to the place of like harmony in terms of what your vision is for the future of the organization, you're going to have disparate planning without a unified vision.
Lowell, I think this is really interesting. There's a couple things I want to comment on here. Number one is, Nikki, well done. And I'm really impressed. You're the first association I've seen that is using Traction as a strategic planning tool. I'd be very curious to learn more about how you're approaching that and how you're, that'd be a really interesting conversation, because everybody I know doing that is an entrepreneur. Very, very cool. Lowell, in touching base on the stakeholders where you capture the information, that's another interesting conversation. And I want to just make it much more specific. Oftentimes we talk about capturing feedback from members, but there's one more segment of your stakeholders, or there's another stakeholder, it's a better way of saying it. There's another stakeholder that we oftentimes ignore, and that is your staff. And your staff has an incredible wealth of knowledge about what's going on in the membership. And so as a membership chair, I mean, as a membership director or as an executive director, especially in the bigger organizations, oftentimes my guess, again, I've never been there, but my guess is, and based on the conversations I've had and having run a company big enough so I start to lose touch with what's going on in the front lines, you're exposed to issues that pop up. You're exposed to fires that you need to put out. You're exposed to things that happen by happenstance, as opposed to what's happening on a regular basis on the front lines. So yeah, stakeholders, certainly the members are a stakeholder, and categorizing them and breaking down into segments. But oftentimes we forget about asking our staff questions on a continuous and regular basis. I'm wondering why you're smiling, but let's not forget about the board too. So we go to the board, we present to the board, we might ask them for their input, but capturing the board feedback is probably important too. And then the final thing I want to mention before you tell me why you're smiling is there was a guy named Gleb Tsipursky, that's Tsipursky starting with a T, that spoke about information or knowledge-based decisions at making, I think the session at ASA in Columbus was called social awareness to be a better leader. But essentially, Gleb talked about, that's Gleb, by the way, it's an unusual name. But Gleb spoke about using information, using data to make decisions, as opposed to using your gut. And the gut is a very dangerous place to make decisions. So why are you smiling?
So what you're saying, I think, pairs nicely. Dion Deers asked any suggestions and survey alternatives for gathering feedback. So this is not going to be comprehensive, but you want the list of like listening input sources. You know, I love the other stakeholder groups you were identifying, Dave, and I was going to do it really quick, right? So members, the 6-month 3-question survey, as well as every, like when CEOs come on, they do like road tours, like road trips, like go and meet everyone. There actually should be site visits each year. There should be 4 to 6 random phone calls to random members each month, just to get like a qualitative, like what's going on, give me a voice of like what your experience has been, and include some board members on those. There should be deeper dive interviews with every major volunteer each year on like how their journey is going, how is it shaping, and where they're growing. There should be hopefully some sort of like micro focus groups anytime that you get members together for 5-10 minutes and give us feedback on what you're experiencing and what you see. If there's competitive organizations or cooperative ones, who's belonging to those organizations, so you can see what's going on in their publications, you can see what's going on in the environment, so you have that external voice. If you have solution providers, right, you have industry partners, how are you asking not just for their funds, but for their knowledge? They're seeing across the industry, and so where's their voice in terms of identifying opportunities and threats? Staff are incredibly important. How is their voice included and asked for in terms of like what they're hearing from the field, what topics are coming up time and time again? Like these are all, you can design a system of input of all these voices coming in. What I'd actually say is the linchpin is having a master listener or a series of master listeners. And this is where organizations need to turn some focus, is if you have all of that input, how is that translating to actually the key salient points that are rising to the top that need to make it onto a board agenda? You know, who's listening for the patterns that you hear the same thing in the survey and the interview and the 6-month thing and the external? You hear the same thing 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 times. That should be part of a strategic discussion in terms of how is the organization reacting there. And I've seen some organizations actually start to think about having like a master listener as a position on the board to like then help the board like clarify what the areas they should be discussing. That is like a staff responsibility of translation, or some pairing between governance and staff to do that as well. But you know, as a collector of the impact of member voice, I'm curious, Dave, like how do you see like the translation of like all these avenues of input from key groups to actually the key places of priority that an organization needs to be thinking about?
So let me touch on a couple things that I think will answer that question. Number one, Liz, traction, if you missed it earlier, traction, scaling up. These are systems that entrepreneurs traditionally use for strategic planning and visioning. Traction is by Gino Wickman, and scaling up is by Vern Harnish. There's a handful of others. Those are the 2 most popular, but that's what we're talking about when we say traction.
And Nikki Duffney said the Marine Retailers Association of America, MRAA, look like it's adopting a traction EOS currently. So that's a good peer-to-peer connection if you want to make or look to see what they're doing. The Marine Retailers Association of America.
And we just have another minute or 2 in our promised time. So let me try to answer your question, and I'm going to do it as an addendum to some of the comments you said. I really like that list of the inputs for feedback. Really liked it. I am not a big fan of surveys. However, I do believe there's a time for a survey. I think that, and generally when you're creating a survey, I think Mina, who I think left now, but Mina said, how do you figure out what questions to ask? You know, if you get a survey consultant, you can dump a fair amount of money into creating a survey, and there's probably some value to doing that dissection. That's how I refer to a survey. You're dissecting your members. You're not engaging them. A survey doesn't engage them. You're studying them. You're a scientist now looking at your members, and you should probably get a scientist to help you figure out what questions to ask. But some of the things you didn't touch on, Lowell, that I think is really important is a lot of the things you touched on were random, or what I call by happenstance. So pick a focus group, or you pick people or volunteers. The thing that I really like, and I think our customers really like about the prop fuels, what we've created, is you can eliminate happenstance. By targeting very specific groups of people, you can identify very specifically who needs attention in your membership. Scott Douglas from NSCA, he did a session exactly on this at ASA as well in Columbus. And his whole session was about how he asks questions, and based on the sentiment analysis, they're of course a prop fuel customer, and the reason why I bring them up is because they're using it in a very innovative way. But based on the sentiment analysis that we have in there, he knows who to call and reach out to, either because they're supporters or they're detractors. If you're looking at the NPS words, they're promoters or detractors. And so he'll call them and try to convert the detractors into promoters. So I like to eliminate the happenstance when connecting with people. Rather than just picking up the phone and talking to someone random, pick up the phone and talk to somebody that really needs to be talked to. And then I think communities are really cool. It's 1:32 Eastern time right now, so we've got to start to wrap this, but we could do a whole session on communities. I may not be the right person to have in that, but communities are another good way to capture the voice of members. Here's my struggle with communities, is they only capture your most engaged members, which is like, it's good, but now you're only, all you're doing is getting your most engaged members more engaged. We want to go deeper into your membership that is less engaged and make them more engaged. So anyway, I love communities, but they're really good for those highly engaged members, but not so good for getting unengaged members involved.
Well, I would challenge that's how you define community, my friend. I think, you know, I very much enjoy the power of local, right? Like components, our chapters, our sections, our special interest groups. And there you'll also often find this like depth and breadth of membership that aren't nationally or globally engaged, that have like feet on the ground perspective of what's actually happening. Now, how do we tap into the networks that we have, where community isn't just a singular definition of the base organization, but has these wide reaching webs and fingers and hands that could really provide useful perspective. That I think is how we define it, and then how we structure around meaningful input. You know, I think one of the most powerful things in terms of strategy and visioning and planning that I try to do with organizations when we come out with goals and come out with initiatives or tactics and milestones is to say, before you finalize, like, who are the key partners that you have that are going to help you achieve these things, right? It's not just members, right? It's also the chapters. It's also the volunteers. And then before you set like what success looks like, ask them in the work that they're doing, like in the work that they want to do, where they see like aligned goals with the goals of the organization, so that their work actually drives the organization towards the achievement it wants to see in pursuit of its mission and vision. So that in essence, strategy isn't of the leadership, strategy isn't of the organization. The import of achieving mission and vision through a strategic direction is felt by every arm of the organization. That you actually build, American Society of Civil Engineers does this, as the American Chemical Society does this really well, that they have for each of their goal areas ways that any single member can contribute to achieving that goal. You go on their website, like any member, goal 1, here's 3 or 4 things you can do. So it's not just the work of the leadership. And I think within there's powerful voice as well. There's the member saying it's my voice and my effort that are needed by my organization in order for it to succeed. It's not just my dollars. It's my participation. It is my interest. It is my being able to speak about the power of the field. It's my voice on the hill. It is my giving to the next generation. There are all these places of connection, that build loyalty, where voice in itself is incredibly important.
Man, that right there is a really good topic of loyalty, and how do you create the sense of belonging in your membership, because that's far more valuable at this point, I think, than content. Content is ubiquitous. It's everywhere. If I think this is just my personal opinion, we could go on and on about this, but I think we might have to save that for, you know what, Lowell, we should do these more often, just kind of fun chats. I could see doing this with you every month or every quarter or something. This would be a lot of fun. Listen,
keep my brain to keep up with you.
My brain doesn't keep up with me. That's what they call ADD, I think. Let's do this. Let's have a final comment. And while we're doing that, if you have any other questions, type them in the chats. And Lowell, I was thinking about it while you were talking, so I'll go first. Think about what you want to say next. My final comment is this: and this is more of an ask, if in this conversation you're asking yourself, well, damn, we do surveys and we don't have a good mechanism for capturing feedback, and you want to see how we're doing it at PropFuel, how we're focusing on channels and asking questions in a drip format over time, then reach out to me. I'm pretty sure we're going to reach out to you after this webinar with the recording and so on. Just respond back to the email and say, hey, let's set up a time so I can see what the product looks like. I'd love that, and that's the whole reason we do this, to help spread the word about what we're doing here. So, Lowell, what do you have?
I would have that incorporating the voice of the member into your strategy efforts shouldn't feel like an added burden. I actually think that the organization's strategic visioning, planning, and direction without the voice of the member as an ongoing key component isn't going to succeed. You know, Nikki asked about how do you work with this in a reality of a budget, whether it's small or medium, and you work within a reality of budget by making it an ongoing process. So you don't have to like pour everything into like a one-day retreat, although those were good. But like, how do you build systems of ongoing listening? And you know, I hope that in the discussion we were able to have today, that those that attended are at least walking away with going back and saying, so we think about like voice of the member. Number one, what do we mean by voice? Like, what are the input places? Number two, what do we mean by member? Like, who are the stakeholders that we need to capture that voice? And number three, how are we actually going to like listen in a meaningful way so we come up with the right discussion, so that when we do our strategy, when we gather for a retreat, when we come up with our plan, when we come up with a vision that's supposed to both inspire and direct and let us make impact and achieve mission and vision, that's not done in isolation from voice, but from inclusion of voice in an ongoing way. You know, look, the primary work of Vistakova, of my company, is one of facilitation. You know, I very much adhere to the more than consultant. Like, I like to come in and facilitate and ask questions. Whether you bring in a facilitator or you have on-staff facilitators, having people that can help you ask these right questions to hear the right answers, I think, is incredibly important to a process of strategy.
So let's that's a wrap for this webinar. I do want to touch on at least one of the questions that's come in, and that is the budget thing. How do you approach budget? I actually wrote a blog post on how you turn feedback into a revenue stream. So if you're interested in that, let me know. You can respond back, send me an email, dave@propfuel.com, or just respond back to the follow-up we send. But it's a blog post with a bunch of ideas. It doesn't go too deep. But I can tell you this: there's 3 places where you can get money from feedback. One is in retention. The purpose of capturing regular feedback is to increase retention, especially new member retention. Number 2 is in increase in activity. If you understand, as Reggie Henry wants to know, what is it that my members want in the next 6 months? If you can figure that out based on the feedback you're getting, then you can increase activity, and the revenue stream will go up. And then the third thing is, we actually have a couple customers that have turned this asking questions into a revenue stream by getting sponsors to come up with questions that they want the answer to. So now, if you're an association, you have a sponsor that thrives on your members. Let them ask a question to your members and give them the response. Give them the data they're looking for, and you can incorporate that into your sponsorship program. So those are 3 ideas on how to build them into your budget.
Nice little non-dues revenue bonus point there for everyone. Well, nice little cherry on top, Dave. Paul asked if we would be sending the recording out. Yes, we were recording this, and so everyone who registered will get a copy of the full discussion. And we hope that it's been helpful for everyone. Hope it's been a great place of at least learning or inspiration or somewhere to start. And that the format of not walking through 50 slides in 30 minutes, but actually a vibrant discussion of what is hopefully inspirational strategy and listening has been something that's.
Well, we have you to thank for that, Lowell. If it was up to me, I would have been pitching and showing screenshots, maybe even screen sharing. Who knows what kind of slides.
My ASAE session this year was for the love of blank, please not another webinar. So
I saw that. Yeah, I'd probably have like a triangle in there with the biggest, most important thing at the bottom is the foundation, and I probably have some circle in there with the spokes and all kinds of cool stuff. Hey guys, thank you so much for being a part of this.
Thank you.
I'm serious, Lowell. I would love to keep doing these just because it's fun to participate a little bit. And and Lowell, thank you so much for entertaining me with this idea. Thank you all.
Thank you, Dave, for hosting, and thank you, everyone. Bye, everyone.